I don't know how else to say this except straight. The night the sky split open above Arizona, I stopped believing the church had told us the truth. I'd always thought blasphemy began that way, with doubt, with questions. But what happened to Daniel Wirth wasn't born from rebellion. It was born from light that didn't belong to this earth. For years I kept silent, convincing myself it was a hallucination, a trauma echo. But lately, as the world grows stranger and the sermons sound emptier, I can't keep it in anymore. So I'm telling you what happened. Believe me or don't, but if you ever find yourself driving alone past mile marker 117 on Route 89 at midnight, remember my name and turn back. Because that's where everything I knew about God died, and something older took its place. Daniel had gone out there to forget. His wife had left 6 months earlier, the kind of clean departure that leaves a man wondering whether love was ever real or just another contract written in fear of loneliness. He'd been sleeping in his truck, chasing work, repairing wind turbines, living off gas station coffee and the Bible his mother gave him when he was 12. The desert, to him, felt honest. It burned away illusions. On that particular night, the wind carried the dry, electric smell that comes before a storm. The horizon flickered with heat lightning, and his radio hissed with bursts of static that formed almost words before vanishing. Around 11:43 p.m., the dashboard clock froze. Every light on the truck dimmed to red embers. The engine coughed once and died. He thought it was the battery. Then he saw the glow. It wasn't a beam or a spotlight. It was a trembling sphere of pale violet hovering above the sagebrush about 50 yards off the road. It pulsed like a heartbeat, expanding and contracting, and with every pulse the air hummed deeper, pressing against his chest like invisible hands. Daniel stepped out, phone in hand, thinking maybe it was a drone or experimental craft. But when the wind went silent, completely silent, he knew this was something else. No crickets, no rustle. Just that low vibration that seemed to come from inside his bones. The light stretched vertically, widening into the shape of a doorway cut into the night itself. Inside was not brightness, but a darkness so rich it shimmered. Then it stepped out. The figure was tall, impossibly thin, draped in what looked like fabric made of moving light, patterns shifting like the surface of water under moonlight. Its face, if you could call it that, was almost human, but the features kept rearranging subtly as though reality couldn't decide which version to show. Eyes without pupils, glowing faint gold, fixed on Daniel, and a voice entered him without passing through the air. "Do not fear the light," it said, and yet fear was the only thing he felt. He stumbled back, whispering, "Jesus, help me." The being tilted its head, and for a moment its expression was sorrow itself. "You call to him," it said, "but you do not know whom you call." Daniel's throat locked. He wanted to run, to hide, but something in the being's sadness rooted him there. "What are you?" he managed. The reply came like chords played backward. "A witness, a messenger from before your scriptures were written. We came when he came. We were there when they changed his name." Daniel's mind reeled. Changed his name? The creature moved closer and the temperature dropped. Condensation formed on the truck windows, though the night was warm. "They called him Jesus," it said. "That was not his name. It was the sound the empire could pronounce. The truth was sealed under Rome's tongue, buried by the councils who feared what he truly was." The being's light flickered, revealing within its body shapes that resembled wings folded inward, made of pure geometry. Daniel thought of stained glass angels, only these angles of light looked mathematical, ancient, terrifying. "You're lying," he said automatically, as though reciting from a sermon. "The Bible is the Word of God." The creature's tone darkened, resonating through the sand. "The Word of God was never written," it said. "It was spoken in light. Men turned it into law, and law into control." At that moment, Daniel's phone screen burst to life on its own, scrolling through verses he didn't open, passages from Revelation about beasts and false prophets, and then a single phrase appeared in white letters. "Who altered the message of the stars?" The light from the sphere intensified, casting long, black shadows. "They built temples to cage him," the being continued. "They painted his face to match their power. The church you know is not the bride of Christ. It is the mask of empire still feeding on his name." Daniel shouted over the hum, "Then what is salvation?" The creature reached out a hand made of light fragments. When its fingers brushed his forehead, memory exploded. He saw crucifixions on other worlds, beings of every shape carrying symbols of the same cross, galaxies where the story repeated, different languages, same betrayal. He saw men in robes erasing scrolls, rewriting the words to promise obedience instead of awakening. He screamed, falling to his knees, the sand vibrating beneath him. The being whispered, "He did not come to forgive sin. He came to end the illusion that you were ever separated from the source." Daniel wept. "Why me?" he said. "Why tell me?" The answer was almost human. "Because you still listen." Then everything imploded, the light, the sound, the cold, drawn back into a single point that shot upward and vanished among the stars. The desert went dead silent again. The truck engine restarted on its own, the clock reading 11:44. Only 1 minute had passed, but Daniel's hair was dusted white at the temples, and the skin around his eyes glowed faintly as though burned by light. He drove until dawn without stopping, the words echoing in his skull. The mask of empire, not forgiveness, but awakening. By sunrise, he no longer knew whether he'd seen an angel, a demon, or the truth itself. But he knew one thing. He could never step inside a church again. The next morning, Daniel woke up in a motel off Highway 60, drenched in sweat that smelled faintly of ozone. The sunlight felt wrong, too sharp, too loud, and when he closed his eyes, he could still see the violet glow burned into his vision like an afterimage. He tried to shake it off, told himself it was exhaustion, dehydration, maybe the caffeine and lack of sleep. But when he leaned toward the mirror, he froze. Around his eyes, faint circular marks glimmered beneath the skin, like rings of pale gold barely visible beneath the surface. He touched them, half expecting pain, but they pulsed softly to his heartbeat. He pulled back, heart racing. Maybe radiation burn, some kind of chemical exposure? He called the front desk to ask where the nearest clinic was, but halfway through the call, the radio behind the counter switched itself on with a crackle, blaring static before forming words that shouldn't have been possible. "Daniel Worth," the voice said, distorted but clear. "Do not seek medicine. The mark is remembrance." The clerk's mouth hung open. "You heard that?" Daniel asked. The man nodded slowly, his hand trembling as he reached for the volume knob. Before he could touch it, the signal cut. Dead air. Daniel left without another word, his mind unraveling in silent panic. He drove east toward Flagstaff, convinced he was losing it. Every few miles, the truck's dashboard clock flickered backward, 11:43, 11:44, 11:43 again, like time itself was mocking him. He tried the radio, flipping stations for anything normal, but between every channel, came whispers, phrases that made his skin crawl. The mask of empire, the name rewritten, the voice of light silenced. He slammed the radio off and drove until the sun began to drop behind the mesas. That's when he saw the church. It stood alone off an unmarked dirt road, small, weathered wooden cross leaning forward as if bowing under some invisible weight. Its sign read, St. Jude's Mission, Est, 1884. A place forgotten by time. Maybe, he thought, faith could still anchor him. Maybe stepping inside a holy space would silence the madness. He parked and pushed the creaking door open. The air inside was cool and thick with candle smoke. A lone priest stood by the altar, lighting wicks one by one. "You're a bit late for Mass, son," the priest said without turning. His voice was calm, almost rehearsed. Daniel hesitated. "I'm not here for Mass, Father. I just needed somewhere quiet." The priest turned then, an older man with watery blue eyes that studied Daniel too long. "Quiet can be dangerous when the mind's unsettled," he said softly. "Sometimes silence speaks louder than God." Daniel didn't respond. He sat in the back pew, staring at the wooden crucifix above the altar. But something about it felt off. The carving's eyes weren't closed in peace. They were open, staring down, pupils carved like spirals. "Who made that?" Daniel asked. "The original missionaries," the priest replied, walking closer. "It's been here since before this town had a name." Daniel nodded slowly. The priest wiped his hands on a cloth and asked, "You've seen something, haven't you?" The question hit like a slap. "What makes you say that?" "Your eyes," the priest said. "They've seen light that doesn't belong to this world." Daniel's stomach dropped. "You don't even know me." "I know the look," the priest said quietly. "You're not the first to come here after meeting one of them." Daniel's voice cracked. "You mean aliens?" The priest's expression hardened. "Don't use their names so casually. The church calls them deceivers. The Vatican's had files on encounters like yours for centuries." He opened a drawer behind the altar and pulled out a thin leather folder, edges frayed. Inside were photos, grainy black and white, of luminous figures standing beside crosses in desert landscapes, military men bowing before them, priests holding crucifixes toward blinding light. "Why would the church hide this?" Daniel whispered. The priest sighed. "Because they don't serve the same master you think they do." He stepped closer, voice dropping to a tremor. "The Christ of the cosmos came to free minds. The Christ of Rome came to bind them. They couldn't allow the world to know he spoke not only to men but to other worlds, so they created a story of sin and ransom instead of awakening and return." Daniel backed away, shaking his head. "You're talking heresy." "Am I?" the priest said. "Or are you beginning to remember what you saw?" Daniel's vision blurred for a second. The room flickering as though overlaid with another version of itself. Ancient stone walls, the smell of incense and blood, priests chanting in Latin while lights descended outside. His knees buckled. "What's happening to me?" "They marked you," the priest said gently. "You're a witness now. They'll find you again when you're ready to choose." "Choose what?" "Whom to serve, the Empire or the light?" A sudden crash split the air. The candles blew out all at once. Outside, engines roared, black SUVs tearing up the dirt road, headlights slicing through the night. The priest's face went pale. "You have to go," he said urgently. "They monitor the frequencies of the marked. You've been traced." Daniel hesitated. "Who are they?" The priest didn't answer. He pressed a small silver medallion into Daniel's hand, a cross with strange geometric engravings, and whispered, "If you want the truth, go to the canyon. The coordinates are etched on the back. Don't stop for anyone." Before Daniel could speak, the church windows shattered inward from a concussive burst. Light, white, mechanical, flooded the sanctuary. Men in black tactical gear poured in, shouting orders. The priest shoved Daniel toward the back exit. "Run!" Daniel sprinted into the desert night, sand cutting his face as helicopters thundered above. He dove behind a boulder, clutching the medallion. The inscription glowed faintly, 34-562N, 111470W. He looked up just in time to see the church, engulfed in white fire, silent as a candle being snuffed out. The flames rose without smoke, then vanished. Nothing left but dust. Daniel sat trembling, realizing that whatever had found him in the desert wasn't finished. Something else was watching from above, waiting for him to follow. And deep inside, a voice not his own whispered, "The lie must fall before the return can begin." Daniel drove through the night, guided only by the flickering coordinates etched on the medallion's back. The road narrowed into gravel, then dust, then nothing but open desert stretching endlessly beneath a bruised sky. He didn't know what part frightened him more, the silence or the growing sense that someone was driving behind his thoughts. His hands trembled on the wheel, eyes fixed on the glowing digits on his phone's GPS that refused to stabilize. Sometimes they spun like a compass caught in a magnetic storm. Every now and then the radio came alive again, whispering his name in a dozen voices, male, female, child, each one blending into the next. He killed the engine near dawn and continued on foot, the medallion warm against his chest. The wind howled through the canyon mouth, carrying a sound like a choir, humming from miles away. By the time he reached the coordinates, the sun had barely risen. Before him opened a vast chasm lined with red rock, spiraling downward like a colossal fingerprint pressed into the earth. He could feel vibration beneath his feet, faint but rhythmic, as though the ground itself was breathing. At the canyon's edge stood a rusted sign that read U.S. Geological Survey, Restricted Area. He laughed bitterly. Of course it is. He climbed down anyway. The descent took hours, every ledge slick with dust and sweat. Halfway down he found carvings, ancient petroglyphs glowing faintly in the dim light, crosses inside circles, men kneeling before shapes that looked like suns with wings. Beneath them, English words crudely scratched into the rock. He never left. The canyon floor was cooler, almost metallic in scent. He noticed thin streams of water running along cracks that shimmered with phosphorescent light, as though the minerals were alive. Then he saw the archway. It wasn't natural. Two stone pillars, black and glassy like obsidian, framed an entrance that led into darkness deeper than night. His pulse quickened. "This can't be real," he whispered. But the air pulled him forward, whispering through his mind in that same chorded voice from the desert. "You returned." The words weren't spoken aloud, yet they filled the canyon like thunder under his skin. A shape began to form within the darkness, tall, luminous, its edges shifting like liquid fire. Daniel fell to his knees. "What do you want from me?" The being emerged fully then, different from before. Its light was fractured, as if wounded, leaking streaks of violet and gold. "We want what was taken," it said. "The memory of truth, the voice they buried beneath the altar." Daniel's throat tightened. "You said the church changed his name. What did you mean?" The being's eyes flared, and suddenly the canyon was gone. He stood inside an enormous chamber of light, floating symbols spinning around him, languages not of earth, their meanings pressed directly into his mind. He saw an image, a man of blinding radiance, teaching among beings not human, his words creating ripples in the air. Then soldiers stormed in, metallic armor gleaming. They took him, dragged him toward a portal of flame. "The Empire captured the messenger," the voice said. "They took his story, changed his flesh into a symbol of fear. They told you he died to pay for sin, but he was taken because he threatened control. The resurrection was not a miracle of death, it was an escape across worlds." Daniel's knees buckled. "You're saying Jesus wasn't human?" "He was more than human," the being replied. "He was the first awakened from the dream of matter. The Christ consciousness is not one man, but a frequency of creation. He came to show you how to wake, but they made you worship sleep." The chamber flickered and dissolved. Daniel found himself back in the canyon, heart pounding. "Then what is salvation?" he demanded. "To remember you were never lost." The words vibrated through him so violently he thought his ribs would crack. "Then why hide this? Why let the church control it?" "Because fear is easy," the being said. "Love is not. They used his name to build empires, to crown kings, to bind souls with guilt. Every altar is a battery, every prayer in ignorance a signal that feeds the system." Daniel staggered back. "You sound like demons pretending to be angels." For a moment the being's light dimmed, revealing within it faces, dozens, maybe hundreds, some human, some alien, all looking at him with unbearable sorrow. "Would a demon teach you freedom?" it asked. "Or beg you to question your chains?" Before he could answer, the ground shuddered. The canyon walls flared with light as helicopters thundered overhead. The being turned its gaze upward. "They have found you again, the keepers of the veil." A beam of light from above seared the canyon floor. Daniel shielded his eyes as men descended on ropes, figures in black armor with insignias he didn't recognize. One of them shouted, "Target acquired!" Another raised a device that emitted a sharp hum. The being convulsed, its form fracturing into shards of light that scattered like embers. Daniel screamed, "Stop! You're killing it!" But the men ignored him. Within seconds the light imploded, leaving behind nothing but a faint scorch mark in the shape of a cross. Two soldiers grabbed Daniel and forced him to the ground. "He's marked," one said. "Protocol 7. They injected something cold into his neck. The world spun into black. When he woke, he was inside a white room, windowless, sterile, humming faintly. A voice came from an intercom. "Mr. Worth, you've been through a traumatic event. You're in a federal facility for your safety." "Where am I?" he croaked. "Off the record," the voice said. "Area 17. You saw something classified. You will not speak of it again." Daniel laughed bitterly. Classified. That thing wasn't military. Silence. Then the voice, "Tell us what it told you." Daniel hesitated, then whispered, "That Jesus wasn't what we think." The intercom crackled. "We know," the voice said, "and that's why you can't leave." When Daniel woke again, his wrists were strapped to a table, a thin band of metal pressing against his forehead. The ceiling above him glowed with a cold blue light that seemed to hum in rhythm with his pulse. A woman in a grey lab coat stood over him, her expression unreadable, eyes too still to be kind. "You're safe," she said, the words hollow, mechanical. "My name is Dr. Crane. You were found near an unregistered excavation site." Daniel tried to sit up, but the restraints tightened automatically. "That wasn't an excavation," he rasped. "You killed it." She raised an eyebrow. "Killed what, Mr. Worth?" He met her eyes and saw no curiosity there, only assessment. The being, the light. Her face didn't change. "You were exposed to experimental flares dropped by a surveillance drone. The heat and stress caused hallucinations." Daniel almost laughed. "That's your story?" "It's the truth that will keep you alive," she said softly. Do you understand? He stared at the reflection of her badge in the table's polished surface. Crane, L. Division of Esoteric Studies. His chest tightened. What kind of government division is that? She didn't answer. Instead, she turned to a screen displaying a neural scan of his brain. You experienced extreme synaptic hyperactivity in the temporal lobe, she said. Same pattern we've recorded in prior subjects. Prior? Daniel whispered. How many of us? She turned off the display. Enough. The door hissed open and a man stepped in wearing a black suit, older, grey hair, cropped close. He carried himself like authority personified. Mr. Wirth, he said calmly. I'm Director Havel. You've stumbled into matters older than your constitution. Daniel met his gaze. You know what it was, don't you? We know what it pretends to be, Havel said. Entities of non-human origin have interfered with human theology for centuries. Every culture receives its own version, gods, angels, and saviors. But the intent is the same, to manipulate evolution. Daniel felt cold all over. That wasn't manipulation, it spoke truth. Havel's smile was thin. That's what they want you to believe. They use spiritual language because faith bypasses logic. Then why suppress it? Daniel demanded. If they're lying, why not expose them? Havel studied him. Because chaos feeds them. Belief, any belief, creates resonance. The church is containment. The story of sin and redemption is a control mechanism, yes, but it also keeps the greater infection quarantined. Dr. Crane shifted uncomfortably. Havel continued, You think you've uncovered the church's lie, but what if the lie protects you from something far worse? The words hit Daniel like ice water. You're saying the alien was evil? I'm saying it's efficient, Havel replied. And efficient things don't care what you call them. He leaned closer. You were marked by contact. That makes you both a threat and a key. We intend to study you until we understand which. I'm not your experiment, Daniel snapped, straining against the cuffs. Havel turned to Crane. Administer the sedative. Wait, Daniel began, but the needle pierced his arm, and the world slid sideways. When he woke, he was in a cell. No windows, one steel door, a single flickering light overhead. The medallion was gone. He pressed his palms to his temples, whispering the words the being had said, the mask of empire, the illusion of sin. The walls vibrated faintly as if answering. Then from the shadowed corner, a voice whispered, You saw them too. Daniel jerked upright. There was someone else in the room. An old man, thin as paper, eyes shining like glass marbles in the dim light. Who are you? Daniel asked. They call me Father John, the man said. Used to be a priest, until I saw what you saw. Daniel approached cautiously. The light? The man nodded slowly. I met them in 1983 in New Mexico. They came through the sky like fire but spoke of peace, told me the same thing. They said the church lied, that Christ was not of this world. You believed them? I wanted to, Father John said, until I learned what happens to those who do. He lifted his sleeve. Scars ran along his arm in circular patterns, faintly glowing like Daniel's marks. They called us messengers, said we were chosen to awaken mankind, but the more I listened, the less human I felt. They feed on revelation, Daniel. Every time someone questions the old story, they grow stronger. Doubt is their altar. Daniel's stomach twisted. That's not possible. Isn't it? The old man said. They promise freedom, but their light blinds you to one truth. Jesus was not theirs to redefine. He came to save us from them. Daniel felt his heart stutter. You're lying. They showed me memories, visions of him among stars. Illusions, Father John said. Echoes of what they want you to see. You think the Vatican hides secrets? So do they. Two empires fighting for the same souls. He leaned closer, voice shaking. They want you to doubt until you can't tell faith from infection. That's how they win. Daniel backed away, mind spinning. The ceiling light flickered violently, and for a split second the walls seemed to melt into infinite corridors of darkness. A low hum filled the air, the same frequency that had preceded the being's arrival. Father John clutched his ears. "No, not again!" he shouted. Daniel looked up just in time to see the bulb burst. The cell was plunged into red emergency light. A shadow moved across the wall, expanding until it filled the room. Within it, a faint outline of wings unfolded. The voice returned, layered, echoing. "You cannot imprison light," Father John screamed. "Don't listen, Daniel! It's the deceiver!" Daniel dropped to his knees as the walls vibrated. "What do you want from me?" he cried. The shadow extended a hand made of radiance and whispered, "To finish what he began." Father John lunged between them. The instant his body touched the light, it disintegrated into ash that shimmered and vanished. Daniel stared in horror as the shadow's glow dimmed to gentle gold. He was bound by fear. It said, "You are not." The door burst open. Guards stormed in, but their weapons jammed, sparks flying uselessly. The shadow turned toward Daniel and whispered, "Follow the sound beneath the city. There lies the proof." Then it vanished, leaving only silence and smoke. Daniel stood trembling amid the chaos, the word proof echoing in his skull. Whatever game he was in, it had only just begun, and now both heaven and hell seemed interested in his next move. When the alarms began to scream, Daniel didn't think, he ran. The corridor outside his cell pulsed with red emergency lights, shadows stretching like veins through the sterile hall. Somewhere behind him, guards shouted orders, their boots slamming against the concrete. Smoke drifted from the ceiling vents, thick and acrid, making his lungs burn. He didn't know if the shadow's command, "Follow the sound beneath the city," was real or some implanted delusion, but at that moment it was all he had. He tore through the hallways, every turn blurring into the next, until he burst through a service door into a stairwell that plunged downward instead of up. He took the stairs 3 at a time. The deeper he went, the louder the sound became, a low hum, steady and alive, like the breath of the earth itself. The concrete walls vibrated faintly beneath his palms. When he reached the final landing, he found a rusted door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." It wasn't locked. He pushed it open and stepped into darkness. The air here was damp, mineral, ancient. The hum grew clearer, resolving into faint chords, almost like distant chanting. He followed it down a narrow tunnel that sloped deeper into the rock, guided only by the dim glow from the emergency lights above. The further he went, the less the air smelled like machinery, and more like dust and incense. Then, as he turned a corner, he stopped dead. Before him stretched a cavern the size of a cathedral carved into the stone. Pillars rose from the floor, each etched with symbols, both geometric and sacred, crosses, circles, spirals. Candles burned in hundreds of alcoves, their flames barely flickering as if protected by unseen hands. And at the far end stood a massive door made of iron and carved wood. Across its surface were words in Latin, "Veritas sub terra," truth beneath the earth. Daniel stepped forward, his footsteps echoing softly. "Is someone here?" he called. His voice vanished into the dark like it had been swallowed. From the shadows a figure emerged, a woman in tattered robes, her face half hidden by a hood. Her voice was calm, deliberate. You shouldn't have come, Daniel Worth. He froze. You know me? Your arrival was foreseen, she said. We've been waiting for you since the night the veil was torn. He stared, uncertain. Who are you? She lowered her hood. Her eyes gleamed with the same faint gold light he'd seen in the alien's eyes. Some call us the custodians, she said. Others, heretics. We are the keepers of what was buried. Daniel's pulse quickened. You mean the church's secrets? She shook her head slowly. No, humanity's. The woman motioned for him to follow, leading him toward the great door. Centuries ago, long before the church rose, voices came from the stars, not invaders, not saviors, witnesses. They taught early man to read the language of light, to see spirit and matter as reflections of one source. But fear is an old disease. Leaders turned the teachings into rules and the rules into empires. What could free became what enslaved. Daniel's heart pounded. That's what they told me, that the story was rewritten. She studied him, her expression unreadable. And did you believe them? I don't know, he admitted. Part of me wants to, but part of me is terrified that it's all deception. The woman smiled faintly. Both parts are correct. Truth and deception live side by side in every revelation. What matters is which one you feed. She placed her hand against the iron door, and symbols lit beneath her palm, glowing blue. The door groaned and swung inward, releasing a gust of cool air that smelled of dust and stone. Inside was a chamber shaped like a cross, the walls lined with tablets carved from the same black glass as the canyon pillars. In the center stood an altar, not Christian, not ancient, but something in between. Suspended above it was a sphere of light, small and trembling, the same hue of violet that had once hovered over the desert. Daniel stepped closer, mesmerized. What is this? The last remnant of the messenger's presence on this world, the woman said quietly. A fragment of consciousness preserved when the veil closed. It resonates only with those who carry the mark. As she spoke, the light brightened, reacting to his presence. Daniel felt a pull in his chest, like his heart was being tuned to a frequency he'd never known. Images flickered in his mind. Faces, cities, stars, all connected by threads of radiant energy. He heard the same voice from the desert, now softer, almost tender. Daniel, it said, the story of God was never meant to be owned, it was meant to be lived. He fell to his knees, tears stinging his eyes. What do you want me to do? Remember, the voice said, and tell them. The woman placed a hand on his shoulder. If you take this light, it will change you. You'll see the world as it is, not as it appears. But the world will see you as mad. He looked up at her, trembling. Then why me? Because faith without fear is rare, she said. And those who still listen can still awaken. He reached out, fingers trembling, and touched the sphere. Instantly the world vanished into brilliance. He was no longer in the cavern, but suspended in a sea of light, surrounded by forms that moved like thought itself, voices of every faith, every language, singing in harmony. A whisper threaded through it all. The lie was never that he came, the lie was that he left. When the light faded, Daniel found himself lying on the stone floor, the sphere gone, the cavern silent. The woman was gone too, as if she'd never existed. Only the echo of her final words remained in his mind. Truth is not against faith, it is what faith becomes when it grows up. Far above, the earth trembled as sirens wailed in the distance. Daniel rose slowly, feeling something alive burning beneath his skin. A memory of light that would never fade. Whatever awaited him on the surface, he knew there was no going back. He whispered into the silence, then let them come. When Daniel climbed back to the surface, the desert air hit him like the breath of another planet. The sun was rising behind the mountains, bleeding gold through the horizon, but everything felt off. Too still, too bright, as if the world were holding its breath. He stood for a moment at the mouth of the canyon, staring out at the empty stretch of earth that should have been familiar, and realized he didn't recognize it anymore. The sky seemed wider. The light shimmered faintly, bending around the edges of things like the air itself had a pulse. He felt a pressure in his chest, subtle but constant, as if something unseen were tugging him toward the east. He began walking without knowing why, boots crunching over dust and gravel, his mind echoing with the last thing the voice had said. The lie was never that he came. The lie was that he left. By noon he reached the old highway. A car passed, a rusted pickup truck, but when he tried to flag it down, the driver looked at him like he wasn't there. Daniel's reflection in the window glass looked thinner, paler, his eyes faintly glowing in the light. Panic surged through him, then faded almost instantly, replaced by calm detachment. The same hum he'd heard beneath the earth vibrated faintly in the distance, threading through the air like a signal no one else could hear. He found a diner a few miles down the road. It was called Eden's Rest, a name that made him laugh under his breath. Inside, the place was empty except for a waitress wiping down the counter. When she looked up, her smile froze. "You okay, sir? You look like you've seen a ghost." Daniel hesitated. "Maybe I have." She poured him coffee and studied him while he drank. "You from around here?" "Used to be," he said. "I was, gone a while." The woman nodded slowly. "You and everybody else lately." "What do you mean?" he asked. She gestured toward the small TV mounted on the wall. The news was playing footage of strange lights over multiple cities: Chicago, Houston, Jerusalem. "Started a few days ago," she said. "They say it's weather balloons, satellites, whatever. But some folks think it's something else. My pastor says it's the end times. My brother says it's a hoax. Me? I just think it's weird." Daniel felt his hands tremble. "Do people hear anything? A sound?" She frowned. "You mean like the hum?" His heart skipped. "You've heard it?" "Everyone in town has," she said quietly. "Only comes at night? Like the sky's breathing?" Outside, thunder rolled, though the sky was clear. Daniel finished his coffee, left a 20 on the counter, and stepped outside. The hum was faint but growing, matching his heartbeat. He followed it to the edge of town where a group of people had gathered in the dry riverbed. Some held hands, some prayed, and at the center of them stood a boy, no older than 12, staring up at the sky. His eyes glowed faintly violet. Daniel approached slowly. "Hey!" he called. "Kid, are you okay?" The boy turned. His voice was calm, almost serene. "You're one of them." "One of who?" "The ones who heard before the rest." Daniel's breath caught. "How do you know that?" The boy pointed toward the horizon where faint lights shimmered in the daylight, tiny orbs moving in perfect patterns. "They're calling us," he said. "Not to follow, but to remember." The people around them murmured prayers. Some weeping, others laughing, as if drunk on relief. Daniel felt it again, the pressure in his chest, the vibration behind his eyes. It wasn't just sound anymore. It was language, not words, but meaning. A woman nearby dropped to her knees, whispering, "He's returning." Daniel closed his eyes. Images poured through him, flashes of history rewritten, temples burned, texts buried. A voice threaded through it all, the same one that had spoken to him beneath the earth. Do not look to the sky for the kingdom. It was never lost above you. It was buried within you. He opened his eyes, gasping. The crowd was staring at him now, their faces lit by something invisible. The hum intensified until it became a single, sustained note that seemed to pierce the soul. Then, as suddenly as it came, it stopped. The light vanished. The people looked around, dazed, whispering. The boy was gone. Daniel stood there in the silence, chest heaving. A part of him wanted to chase the light, to demand answers, but another part, the one that had touched the sphere, knew that what he'd seen wasn't an arrival. It was a revelation. The sound wasn't coming from the sky. It was rising from within humanity itself, like a memory reawakening. He started walking again, the road stretching endless before him. The sun was sinking now, bleeding red across the horizon. He didn't know where he was going, only that he couldn't stop. Behind him, sirens wailed again, distant but growing closer. He wondered if the government had finally realized the hum wasn't a phenomenon, but a contagion of awareness. As he walked, he whispered the words that had burned themselves into his mind. The kingdom was never lost. Each time he said it, he felt the vibration strengthen. He wasn't afraid anymore. He knew the truth wasn't about angels or aliens. It was about what happens when the divine outgrows its prison of doctrine and becomes consciousness itself. And yet, deep down, one question haunted him. If the light was awakening in everyone, what would happen to the world built on forgetting it? He looked up at the first stars flickering through the dusk and thought he saw movement, something vast and alive drifting just beyond sight. He smiled, not in fear, but in recognition. "I hear you," he said softly. "We all do now." Within days, the world began to split along invisible seams. Cities that once pulsed with the rhythm of commerce and noise now throbbed with something else, a quiet vibration that lived under the skin of things. Radios crackled with static no one could trace. People reported dreams that bled into daylight, cities made of light, rivers that sang, the face of a being that spoke without words. Governments issued denials, scientists spoke of mass hysteria, and churches called for prayer. But the hum continued. It was the sound of the earth remembering itself. Daniel drifted between towns, moving like a shadow through the chaos. Everywhere he went, people seemed to know him without knowing his name. They whispered, "You were one of the first." He didn't correct them. He no longer felt like the man who had walked into the desert. The light beneath the earth had changed him in ways language couldn't touch. Sometimes, when he touched metal or water, it vibrated faintly under his fingers. Sometimes, strangers stared too long, as if they saw a reflection behind his eyes. In a small Nevada town, he stopped at a church that had been turned into a shelter. Inside, rows of people lay on cots, murmuring prayers or sobbing quietly. The pastor, a tall man with weary eyes, was preaching at the altar. "The deceiver walks among us," he said, his voice trembling. "He will come in light and speak of freedom, but he will not bear the cross." His gaze found Daniel at the back of the room. "You," he said, suddenly pointing. "You've seen it, haven't you?" Daniel hesitated. "I've seen something," he said. The pastor stepped closer. "Is it true? Are they angels? Demons? Tell us what you know." Daniel searched the man's face, then the faces of the crowd. "They're neither," he said finally. "They're mirrors. They show us what we've forgotten." A woman stood up. "You mean God?" "I mean everything we call God," Daniel said. "Everything we've turned into walls instead of doors." The pastor's face hardened. Blasphemy! Daniel felt the vibration rise in his chest, a low resonance that filled the air. Light flickered in the stained glass above them, refracting into shapes that danced across the walls. Some people gasped, others screamed. The pastor fell to his knees, clutching his head. "Stop it!" he shouted. "I'm not doing anything," Daniel said softly. "You are." The lights dimmed. Silence fell. When Daniel stepped outside, the crowd didn't follow. The air was heavy with fear and awe, the twin faces of faith. He walked down the street until the town disappeared behind him, swallowed by the endless desert. That night, he camped beneath the stars. The hum had grown faint, almost melodic. He thought about the boy in the riverbed, the woman beneath the city, the words etched on the iron door, truth beneath the earth. He realized the phrase wasn't about a place, it was about depth, the layers of meaning buried under centuries of noise. Humanity had been living on the surface too long. In the early hours before dawn, a group of travelers appeared, their headlights cutting through the darkness. They stopped near his camp and approached slowly. A woman in her 40s spoke first. "We've been looking for you," she said. "You're Daniel Worth, aren't you?" He didn't answer. "We saw what happened in the church," she said. "You didn't harm anyone. You showed them something real. We've all felt it too. The hum. The dreams. We think you can help us understand." Daniel studied them. 5 people, strangers bound by a shared mystery. "You don't need me," he said. "You already know where to look." "But it's spreading," another man said. "Cities are losing power grids. Satellites are shutting down. People say the light is coming from under the ground now, not the sky. What's happening to us?" Daniel looked toward the horizon, where faint glimmers pulsed beneath the sand. "The world's remembering what it is," he said. "But not everyone will want to wake up." As he spoke, the ground trembled, a deep, steady rhythm, not an earthquake, but a heartbeat. The travelers fell silent. The sky above them shimmered, stars bending into slow, deliberate patterns. For a moment, the constellations rearranged themselves into something that almost resembled a face. It looked down upon them, calm and vast, and then dissolved into light. The woman whispered, "Is that him?" Daniel's throat tightened. "It's all of us," he said. "Every life, every prayer, every moment we thought was lost. It's answering back." A wind swept across the desert, carrying dust and heat, and the faint sound of distant voices. Daniel closed his eyes and felt the vibration move through him, not as command, but as invitation. He sensed the same choice offered to every soul, now stirring in the dark. Cling to the known or step into the infinite. When he opened his eyes, the travelers were staring at him with a mix of fear and devotion. He didn't want to be a prophet, he didn't want to be followed, but he understood now that truth, once seen, demanded witness. "Go home," he told them gently. "Tell your families what you felt tonight. Don't preach it, just live it." They nodded, reluctant but trusting. When they left, Daniel stood alone again beneath the vast, trembling sky. The hum had grown stronger, echoing through every heartbeat, every breath. The veil between matter and meaning was thinning, and somewhere deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. He whispered into the wind, "Let it come." By the time the world realized what was happening, it was already too late to contain. The phenomenon spread like a thought shared between billions, an invisible contagion that crossed oceans without needing wires or waves. Power grids failed in synchronized pulses. Electronic systems flickered with patterns no one could decode. Entire cities would fall silent for hours, only to awaken humming in harmony. The press called it the resonance event, Governments called it an emergency, but those who had heard the hum before called it something else entirely, the remembering. Daniel stayed off the radar, moving through the edges of society like a ghost. His face had appeared briefly on news channels after the church incident, labeled a possible instigator of mass psychological contagion. Then it vanished, replaced by headlines about economic collapse and cosmic interference. He knew they were looking for him. Every government, every intelligence agency, every organization that feared losing control. But he also knew they couldn't find what wasn't bound by coordinates. The light that had entered him wasn't a signal, it was awareness itself, and awareness could not be captured. In a small Colorado town nestled between mountains, Daniel found shelter in an abandoned schoolhouse. The windows were broken, the walls covered in faded chalk drawings, but it was quiet. He lit a fire and sat by it, staring at the orange flicker that seemed to move in rhythm with the hum. Outside, the snow fell thick and silent. He hadn't slept in days. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw images that didn't belong to him, people he'd never met, places he'd never been. A woman in Tokyo standing on a rooftop, arms outstretched as light spiraled around her. A group of miners in South America singing softly in the dark as the walls of their tunnel glowed faintly. A soldier in Ukraine dropping his weapon, tears streaming down his face as he whispered, "I remember." He realized the resonance wasn't just spreading, it was synchronizing. Humanity was beginning to dream together. The door creaked open. Daniel spun around. A figure stepped inside, a man in a dark coat, his face half hidden by a scarf. He raised his hands slowly. "I'm not here to arrest you," he said. "Name's Agent Keller. I used to work for the agency. Now I just... listen." Daniel said nothing. Keller stepped closer to the fire. "They told us you started it, that whatever's happening came from contact you made out there in the desert. But after what I've seen, I don't think anyone started it. I think it's older than we are." Daniel studied him. "You've heard it too?" Keller nodded. "Every night. It started as tinnitus, or so I thought. But then it began to whisper my daughter's name. She's been gone 3 years. His voice cracked. You tell me what kind of madness makes the dead call your name in your own head. Daniel poked the fire. Not madness, memory. Memory of what? The world before fear, Daniel said quietly. Before we forgot who we were. Keller's eyes glistened. You talk like it's a choice, but people are dying. Riots in New York, military lockdowns in Europe, the Vatican's broadcasting prayers 24 hours a day just to drown the hum out. If this is awakening, it's killing us. Daniel looked into the flames. Birth and death sound the same when they begin. Keller dropped onto a chair, exhausted. You really believe that, don't you? I don't believe, Daniel said. I see. For a long moment they sat in silence, the only sound the crackle of the fire and the distant hum outside that seemed to come from the mountain itself. Finally, Keller spoke. There's something else. They're building something in the desert, Nevada, or the same place you disappeared from. They call it Project Ark. They say it's meant to contain the resonance, whatever that means. But some of the scientists working on it have started vanishing. Daniel's heartbeat quickened. Contain it? How? They think it's a signal, so they're trying to build a counter-frequency, something that'll cancel it out. If they finish it, Keller hesitated. They might silence whatever this is, for good. Daniel rose to his feet. Then it's not just me they're hunting, it's the memory itself. Keller stood too. You can't go there alone. I won't be alone. Before Keller could ask what he meant, a faint glow began to shimmer through the broken windows. Both men turned. Outside, the snow was falling upward, drawn toward a soft light hovering above the forest. It wasn't bright, but it filled every corner of the night. Keller's face went pale. "What is that?" Daniel stepped forward, eyes wide. "The next movement," he whispered. "It's calling us again." The trees bent slightly, as though bowing to the unseen pulse. The hum rose, steady and low, vibrating through the bones of the building. Daniel turned to Keller. "If they're building a machine to silence it, then this is our chance to remind them what silence costs." Keller swallowed hard. "And if they stop you?" Daniel's expression was calm, almost serene. "Then the world will dream without me." The fire blew out, extinguished by a wind that didn't touch anything else. Outside, the light pulsed once, twice, and vanished. Daniel took his coat, stepped into the snow, and began walking toward the horizon. Behind him, the old schoolhouse stood like a tomb of forgotten lessons. Keller watched from the doorway, torn between fear and awe. The hum was everywhere now, faint but inescapable. It lived in the wind, in the ground, in the beat of his heart. He whispered into the darkness, "What are we becoming?" From somewhere beyond sight, the earth answered, not in words but in vibration, something we were always meant to be. They traveled in silence for most of the first day, driving an old truck that Keller had stolen from an abandoned checkpoint outside Denver. The radio was dead, the sky a flat grey slab over the endless desert, and the only sound was the wind rushing through the cracks in the cab. Every few miles, Daniel could feel the hum deepen, vibrating beneath the tires like a heartbeat coming from under the asphalt. He didn't tell Keller, but he could sense the direction of the resonance, the same way a migratory bird senses magnetic north. It wasn't thought, it was instinct. It was pulling him home, though he no longer knew what home meant. By nightfall, they reached the outskirts of the restricted zone. A line of fences stretched across the desert, topped with barbed wire, dotted with floodlights that glowed faintly through the haze. The place was silent, too silent. Keller killed the engine and stared through binoculars. "That's it," he said. "Project Ark used to be a military test site. Now it's the heart of whatever's left of the government's science division." Daniel squinted into the distance. "I don't see any guards." "There won't be," Keller said. "They rely on drones now." Sure enough, faint mechanical hums drifted through the air. Tiny glints of light moved above the fence line, machines patrolling like metallic insects. Keller reached into the back seat and pulled out a handheld scanner, its display flickering with static. "They're using counter-resonance frequencies, trying to drown the hum out." Daniel closed his eyes, focusing. "It's not working." Keller gave him a wary look. "How do you know?" "Because it's getting louder." The hum began to swell, low and deep, coming from beneath the ground. Keller cursed softly. "You sure we should be here?" Daniel opened the truck door and stepped into the wind. "No," he said. "But I'm sure we can't not be." They moved under the cover of darkness, slipping between dunes and dry shrubs. The fence was tall but old, and the wires hummed faintly with static. Daniel placed his hand on the metal, and, to Keller's shock, the current flickered and died. The entire section of fence went dark. Keller's jaw dropped. "How did you—" Daniel shook his head. "It isn't me, it's the light." They crawled through and crossed a wide expanse of cracked earth. Ahead, a cluster of domes rose from the desert floor, glowing faintly blue under the moonlight. The largest one pulsed with a rhythmic flash that matched the hum. "That's where they're keeping it," Keller said. "Whatever they built to stop the signal." As they drew closer, the air grew thick, charged, the way it feels before a thunderstorm. Daniel's hair stood on end. He felt the resonance inside his chest sync with the pulse from the dome. Each beat pulled him closer until the air itself seemed to resist his movement, like walking through water. Keller reached for him, but Daniel pushed forward, eyes locked on the light ahead. Inside the dome, the world was alive with vibration. Towers of machinery lined the walls, their cores throbbing with faint blue light. At the center stood a structure that looked half machine, half altar, a massive ring of metal suspended over a pool of liquid mercury. Dozens of cables fed into it, all converging toward a single object floating in the center, a sphere of darkness so dense it bent the air around it. Keller whispered, "They're trying to cancel the resonance with whatever that is." Daniel stared, transfixed. "They're trying to silence consciousness." A voice echoed from above them. "Exactly." They turned. A woman stood on the upper platform wearing a lab coat and an expression that was half curiosity, half reverence. Her ID badge read Dr. Elise Moran. "You shouldn't be here," she said, descending the steps. "But I suppose it's fitting that you'd come. The man who started the hum should see how it ends." "I didn't start it," Daniel said. "You were the first," Moran replied. "The desert, the light, the frequencies. It began with you. The entire world's unraveling because of what you brought back." Keller stepped forward. "You're building a weapon?" Moran smiled faintly. "A safeguard. Humanity isn't ready for full coherence. We're trying to restore separation before it destroys individuality. The hum merges everything, thought, memory, will. If it continues, there won't be humans anymore. Just a single consciousness, looping itself forever." Daniel shook his head. "You don't understand. Separation is the disease." "And unity is death," Moran shot back. "We've run simulations. The resonance erases difference, choice. Personality, it's a surrender disguised as salvation." Daniel walked toward the ring. "What if surrender is the point?" Moran's face softened, almost pitying. "You sound just like them." Before he could ask who, the ground trembled. The dark sphere in the machine began to pulse violently, and the lights overhead flickered. Moran looked up, alarmed. "It's reacting to you." Daniel felt it too, the hum in his chest rising, fusing with the rhythm of the machine. The sphere expanded, rippling like water. Shadows poured from it, distorting the air. Keller shouted, "We have to get out!" But Daniel couldn't move. The resonance had locked onto him completely. Images flooded his mind, thousands of faces, billions of thoughts, all merging into a single pulse of awareness. For a moment he saw everything, the birth of stars, the rise and fall of civilizations, the long silence between prayers. Then a voice, familiar, endless, whispered inside the chaos. It was never about separation or unity. It was about remembering the choice between them. The sphere collapsed in a flash of blinding light. When the glare faded, the dome was silent. The machinery had melted. Moran was gone. Keller stumbled through the smoke, coughing. "Daniel!" Daniel stood in the center of the ruin, untouched. The air shimmered around him, faintly glowing. "It's done," he said softly. "The machine's gone." Keller looked around, stunned. "What did you do?" "I didn't stop it," Daniel said. "I set it free." Outside, the sky rippled with light, thousands of points blooming like stars in the atmosphere. The hum had become a symphony, spreading in waves that shook the earth but didn't destroy it. Keller stared, awestruck. "Is that us?" Daniel smiled faintly. "It's everyone." And for the first time, the hum didn't sound like something outside of him. It sounded like home. The world had changed, not in ways anyone could measure on maps or stock markets, but in ways that threaded through the bones of humanity. Cities still stood, government still existed, but the pulse beneath the surface was everywhere now, a low, persistent resonance that people could feel if they paused long enough to notice. Some called it a miracle, others called it madness. Daniel called it home. He walked through the streets of a city that was both familiar and alien, the glow of the resonance faint in every reflection, every breath of wind, every heartbeat he passed. Children stopped to stare, sensing something older than memory, older than doctrine, in the air around them. Strangers held doors, smiled without reason, and whispered things they didn't understand themselves. Humanity had awoken, even if only half conscious of the change. Keller walked beside him, still shaken. "I don't know how to explain this," he said. "People are different, more aware, but also scared. Some are worshipping it, some are running from it, and the governments—" He shook his head. "They're panicking. Every agency in the world is mobilizing. They're calling it a threat to national security." Daniel glanced at him, eyes scanning the crowd. "They're afraid because they still don't understand themselves. The resonance doesn't lie, but it doesn't obey orders either." He stopped to watch a young woman kneeling on the pavement, hands lifted as if catching invisible light. Her lips moved silently, forming words Daniel couldn't hear, yet he understood perfectly. She was speaking memory, not language, and he felt a rush of grief and joy in equal measure, the ancient pulse of humanity surfacing in one fragile body. A soft vibration ran through Daniel's chest, stronger now, almost insistent. He closed his eyes and felt it, flowing outward like a tide, connecting every mind and heart in subtle threads. Keller shivered. "Can you control it?" he asked. Daniel shook his head. "No, and if I could, I wouldn't. Control was what kept us blind." They reached a hill overlooking the city. From there, the full scale of the resonance was visible, a shimmering haze of light, faintly violet, stretching from street to street, pulsing through the skyscrapers and over the bridges. It rippled into the suburbs beyond the hills, touching every home in patterns too complex to name. The hum vibrated in the air, in the ground, in the very space between them. It wasn't alien, it wasn't human. It was both and neither, and something far older than either. Keller swallowed hard. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "But people are scared of what they don't understand. They'll try to fight it." Daniel nodded. "Yes, and some will, but awareness can't be stopped by force. They can imprison bodies, but they can't imprison memory." He let the words drift, feeling the resonance settle into the space around them, as if the city itself exhaled in relief. In the streets below, small pockets of people began to move together, guided by an instinct Daniel could not name. Some knelt, some danced, some simply sat silently, sensing the pulse of the world around them. He felt the echo of the sphere beneath the desert, the fragments of the desert light that had first called him, and realized that nothing had truly left. The resonance had become humanity's memory, its choice, its reflection. It would not obey, but it would remind. Daniel and Keller stood on the hill until the sky darkened. Stars came out in clusters, but they weren't the same stars he had known before. Some shimmered with faint violet light, rippling as if in response to the resonance. The hum became a song, not loud, not forced, but a vibration felt in every muscle, every bone, every thought. "I'm afraid," Keller admitted quietly, "that we won't survive this, that we'll break under it." Daniel shook his head. "We were broken long before this. We just didn't know it. Now at least, we see ourselves." A shadow fell across the hill. Daniel turned and froze, The figure was humanoid, luminous but not human, its form shifting like smoke or heat over asphalt. The hum vibrated louder in its presence. Daniel felt recognition in a way words could never convey. "It's here," he thought. "It's always been here." The being spoke, not with a voice, but with a thought threading into his mind. "You have remembered. That is enough." Daniel understood. The desert light, the underground cathedral, the sphere, the hum. It was never about obedience or faith or doctrine. It was about awakening, the realization that the divine and the human were intertwined, not by control, but by memory, by choice, by recognition. The figure extended a hand, or what could be called a hand, toward him. The vibration in the air intensified, and Daniel felt tears streak his face. He didn't reach. He didn't need to. The resonance was complete in him, and through him, complete in the world. Keller stepped forward, hesitating. "What is it?" "It's everything," Daniel said softly. "And nothing. It's the truth we buried under fear, and now it is awake." The figure shimmered, then dissipated, folding into the night air like smoke returning to its source. The hum softened, now gentle, pervasive, but no longer overwhelming. Daniel felt it pulse in his chest, calm and infinite. They descended into the city. People moved around them, unaware of the enormity of what had passed, yet subtly changed. Small smiles, moments of connection, spontaneous acts of kindness. It was all the evidence Daniel needed. Humanity would remember itself in increments, a ripple through generations. And some would resist, some would deny, but no force could undo what had begun. Daniel and Keller walked in silence. Finally, Keller said, "Will it ever stop?" Daniel looked at the stars above. "Not until we do." He knew the hum would live on, a constant reminder of what humans were capable of when they chose to see. And he also knew that for the first time in history, humanity had a choice that was truly theirs: to build, to awaken, or to remain blind. Daniel closed his eyes, breathing in the resonance of the world, and whispered into the night, "Remember, always remember." And the world answered softly, endlessly, in a song no one could ever forget.